Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here to welcome Devin to Chicago, my hometown. I've known Devin since 2017, and we actually met because of Gordon Parks. And for those of you who might not be familiar, and you'll see some of his images pop up as well, and his images appear in Devin's book as well. Gordon Parks, like Devin, was an artist who wore many hats. He was a photographer, a filmmaker, a musician, a writer, and he's probably best known for the photographs that he created while he was a staff photographer at Life magazine. Beginning in 1948, he was actually the magazine's first black staff photographer. And for a period of about 30 years, he created some of the most groundbreaking, pivotal, iconic images of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. And at the Gordon Parks Foundation, we steward his archive and his legacy. And part of that is also supporting the work of artists who followed in his footsteps. And Devin is exemplary of that. And back in 2017, he was named the Gordon Parks Foundation very first art fellow. And so it's amazing to have it all come back full circle, to be here celebrating the publication of your book, which features the work of Gordon Parks alongside your work, images that were created almost a half century apart, which is incredibly devastating to see, because it makes clear how far we've come, but also how much more work there is to be done and how far we haven't come. And the book itself is extraordinary because in addition to the images, it also features a handful of essays by poets, authors, writers, activists. So it's a book about photography, but it's also a book about community, about collaboration, about mentorship, and those are all things that are foundational to Devin's practice. So I'm gonna start with a quotation by Gordon Parks that you often invoke. And he reflected on his decision to use photography as his medium. He wrote, "I picked up a camera because it was my choice of weapons against what I hated most about the universe: racism, intolerance, poverty." And Devin, you use this quite often. You invoke that quote all the time. So I want to hear a little bit about growing up in Baltimore. What were some of the images you first encountered? What made you pick photography as your choice of weapon?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it. Art was something that was never really offered to us. In Baltimore, I think I maybe had like one art class, and it was like, oh, draw this square. Now draw this line to this line, and now you got a cube. Congratulations. And that's as far as we had in school. I had a normal childhood. I have an overly active mom. Shout out to her. She kept me busy, but when I really found out what was beyond my porch, my front steps. And I remember, one of my childhood friends getting murdered while gambling outside over a dice game. We was about 15 years old. And that's when reality really struck me. I started understanding how cruel the world was. And that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole, not planning my life past 21, because at that point, high school, a lot of my friends had started to pass due to gun violence. And I remember I had this one childhood friend. We were like polar opposites. He was like the straight A student. I'm going to the Army, star basketball player. Complete opposite me, the knucklehead, doesn't apply himself. He does just enough, but always suspended. I had a Napoleon complex because I was short. I was always fighting and getting into trouble, but he went to Iraq. I ended up having a daughter really young at 19, and I really wanted to change my life. And I was like working this job. I decided, because I was in the street life, and when I found out I had a daughter really young, I was like, no, I can't. I want to be here for my child. And he came back from Iraq, and he was into art, and at the time I was working like a corporate job, and we were throwing parties on the side. They make extra money on the side. And he was like, let's do a poetry night, an art night together. And I was like, nobody not coming to that in the hood. We don't know anything about art. I know one Maya Angelou quote or poem, and that's about as far as my poetry history goes. And he said, but women love poetry and art. And I said, all right, I'm sold. We're going to have a poetry and art night. And what I found was this is around 2011. Instagram was coming out, social media was changing, and we started making T-shirts. And what I found was, we would have to take pictures at the poetry night to promote Tonight, which actually turned out to be a hit. In the community, was something different. But I found myself not so much. I was a horrible poet. Like, I was horrible, and I just gravitated towards the camera. I was like, well, I can use this. And I remember borrowing his camera, and I didn't want to give it back. It was the human interaction that I started to notice that I fell in love with initially with the camera, how I can put my friend in front of the lens, and their whole demeanor would change. It was like, oh, let me fix my hair, let me sit right. And I love that, how a person could change. They wanted to see the best versions of themselves. And, growing up, we didn't take a lot of pictures. Like, of course, like grandmother, Easter Sunday, and you were forced to take your school pictures. But oddly enough, we didn't take pictures, unless we went to the club or something like that. And I just found myself wanting to capture everything which was in front of me. And I remember my friend saying, well, that's not your camera, bro. You go get your own. And then he took it from me. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go get my own. But in the midst of that, I started Googling famous black photographers, and Gordon was like the first one that popped up. And I went down this rabbit hole. He had his hair slicked back. He had his pipe. He was just so smooth. And I was like, I want to be like this guy. He's so smooth. And I just remember seeing his work of the gangs in Harlem. And that's what I connected to, because this is what Baltimore is. I can tell these stories too. And that's what sparked it. And I remember going down to Best Buy, let me get that camera bag, let me get that SD card, wrap it up. I'm going to meet you at the front. And I got to the front, and it was like $2,000. And I was like, what? They're like, no one told me how expensive photography was. And I was like, what can I do? Light bulb, call my grandmother. Grandma, what are you doing? She was like, it's Sunday evening. You ain't calling me to see what I'm doing. You want something. And I was like, didn't you just buy a new refrigerator from Best Buy? She was like, yeah, why? I was like, you got any more room in that credit card? Because I want to put a camera on there. And she was like, I thought she was a rapper. I was like, no, I was a struggling poet, but this is my thing, and I'm sticking with it. And she said, all right, I'm going to meet you up there. And I got my first camera in 2013.
It's a good story. You, in the book, and you've talked about this often, and you just mentioned it, you had friends that were killed in the hands of police. You heard about the killing of Michael Brown, and that was a call to action for you. How did that change your approach to photography? What you decided to focus on, what you decided to take pictures of, and your attitude towards how Baltimore was also being depicted in the media?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always felt like I didn't have control of my own narrative, or let alone my own life, where growing up in Baltimore, you can just get shot walking down the street, or someone might come after you because of who you're related to or who you're friends with, and then usually it's just like, we have the mentality that, well, this is just life. It is what it is. We can't change it. So when my friend Sean Gamble, who got into an altercation with an off-duty police officer, and he pulled out his firearm, on-duty police officers just saw another black man with a gun, not realizing he's a police officer. And they start shooting in the crowd, killing the police officer and killing my friend. And I remember all my friends and a lot of the parents going to protest and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, this is life. I have no, why am I going to a protest? It's not going to get nothing solved. I didn't see the power in it. But, fast forward 2 years later, I have a camera, and I start developing a sense of self and pride, and, from just studying Gordon and him leading me to other photographers like Robert Houston and, Jamal Shabazz, and a lot of those other black photographers that, oddly enough, is like, you never hear about them in the school system or anything. So when Mike Brown passed, I decided that I was going to go to the protest. Now I was equipped with this camera, and when I went there and start, documenting, the energy just was infectious. It was like this like gentle, harmony amongst my community that I've never seen before, and to be there and be able to capture it. And so, fast forward, the following year, you have Freddie Gray. And, in Baltimore, it's pretty small, so I grew up with a lot of people that knew Freddie Gray. We move in some of the similar social, circles in Baltimore. And anybody who knows about Baltimore, everywhere I go, I'd have been to Asia, and the first thing someone asks me is Baltimore really like The Wire? You know, it is like I went down a whole rabbit hole last night about The Wire. You know, and it's like, yes, it's actually worse. The Wire is an old story. It is worse than what it was back then. But but it's these intimate moments that people don't know about Baltimore that made me want to show. Because they talk about the burning down CVS and all these things, but they don't understand that, you look at the Nation of Islam, they were the ones protecting people, making sure people could get things that they need. It was the gang members that were, stopping people from rioting. It's these moments that people don't see, it's just media. If it bleeds, it leads. And, a lot of people don't have that compassion for my community. A lot of people come in to document, but they're actually scared of it. But I'm of it, and I feel like no one can tell that story better than me. So I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had a camera, it had Wi-Fi, and I needed to get these pictures out faster than media. So I would shoot and try to get the best imagery, already shot in black and white, Wi-Fi to my phone, and put it straight to social media, because I learned, from past experiences the year before I tried to get my work published, and I couldn't even get a response from my local paper. So I said, the hell with that. I'm going to just do it myself, and I just started putting the work out, and the work just it did what it was supposed to do. It became a vehicle for my community, and we started to take that narrative back. And for the first time, a lot of myself, my peers, we felt like we were speaking for ourselves.
And that's, and then we know, of course, what happened is, and you saw the image of the cover of Time magazine, which appeared in May 2015. So Life reached out to you. They saw your photographs on Instagram, and they reached out to you, and your photograph of those protests ended up on the cover of Life magazine. Now, earlier was mentioned that it was the third time that an amateur photographer's photo appeared on the cover of Time magazine. So that implies something about scale, but what you have to understand is how groundbreaking it is, because it's not just about the technicality and the ability of the photographer, amateur versus professional. What it represented is it meant that somebody that wasn't sent on assignment, someone that wasn't working for an agency, someone that isn't an outsider coming in to just document. This was one of the first time that someone who is of the community speaking on behalf of the community. And that's something that's been, as you just mentioned, really important to your work, to this question of who gets to speak for whom, and also who the audience is, and who are the photographs made for. So after your photograph appeared on the cover of Time, in this national arena, how did that at all change the relationship of you to your community? Did it complicate it in any way? What were the effects of that?
It was just landing on the cover of Time magazine, a little backstory, because it almost didn't happen because I kept hanging up on him. Look, he was calling me from a block number, so I'm thinking it's like a bill collector or a telemarketer or something. So I just kept hanging up, but they kept calling. I finally answered, like, who is this? And it was this guy named, my name is Olivier, and I'm calling looking for Devin Allen. I'm like, first of all, how did you get my number? And, we talked, and, I didn't even understand, because I had a full spread first. And then they called back and said, we love this images. And mind you, at the time, I don't know anything about copyrights or anything. I'm just focused on, let's get this story out. So I'm sending them in the images. And now that I think about it, I was like, I didn't get any contracts and nothing signed. I just sent this straight over. And, I actually was asleep. And when I woke up the next day, it just says amateur photographer from West Baltimore snags the cover of Time magazine, And it wasn't just a win for me. It was my community. Like, everyone was a part of that. It kind of made me like a hometown hero, because I remember when it hit, just online before the physical copies came out. It was just like, as soon as I stepped foot back on the front line, because we were in, Freddie Gray passed away on the 19th, and mind you, he was hurt a week before that, a couple days before that. So from the time that he was injured all the way up till mid-May, going on like for almost a month, we were on the ground, basically like in West Baltimore in martial law. You couldn't be outside past 10 o'clock. You were getting, people were getting arrested and being just held. They wasn't even releasing you. We were getting tear gas, pepper spray. I was getting followed home. So it was two responses. Police officers, paid, some of them paid more attention to me when they started to recognize me. So I was getting hit with shields, whereas though when I was out, it wasn't a lot of photographers. A lot of slew of photographers started coming in, wanting to document the things that I was doing. The community really wrapped their arms around me to protect me. where police officers, I was getting harassed, had a police officer like follow me, make me get out my car, lied and said my license was suspended, made me walk miles to my mom's house and follow slowly until we got to the city line. And my mom lived in Baltimore County, so they can't cross that city line, that jurisdiction. But they followed me all the way up to the very moment where the zip code switched. But for my community, it complicated things for me as an artist because everybody wanted a damn picture now. That made me so mad. It's like, oh my God, Devin Allen, take my picture. And I'm like, I'm not here. Do what you were doing regularly. And so it was kind of like like a gift and a curse. Every time I move, I always just, in the back of my mind, I know that the reason why I'm here today and the career that I've been able to build is built on the broken back of Freddie Gray. And that's something that I have to walk with every single day of my life, that a black man died and I was kind of like anointed in my community and beyond. And that's why I'm still in Baltimore, still doing the work that I do. But far as like since the time cover, I became the eyes of and the ears, and the platform that I've been able to build is really appreciated. Where the organizers they want me there. Whereas though I've seen them shut down other photographers and say, no, we want him, only he can come to this. So I'm happy that my community allows me into that space and continuously to support me to this day.
That's really beautiful. Lawrence Burney, in your book, he talks about when George Floyd was killed, the way in which he was then portrayed in the media. And what are the images that are chosen to represent those that have been killed and murdered? And the images that we see constantly and what becomes sort of our representation of these individuals versus the reality of who they were and what they represented in their community. And so much of what you do is to try and adjust that and reposition it and think again about the perspective of who gets to tell the stories and show the images. And you've talked about photography making you fall in love with Baltimore again, and also as a way to help heal Baltimore. And so talk to us about how that relationship with the city has shifted for you in terms of representing it and what you've tried to correct and how you've done that through your images.
Yes, Baltimore is one of those places, like, I hated it. I just was, the first thing I did when I became an artist, like, I'm going to New York. As soon as I get enough money, I'm going to New York. I'm getting out of here. But after Freddie, I decided to stay. I found my calling, in the imagery where people can, I love photography because it allows me to digest the world, and then I get to regurgitate it to everyone else. It gives me time to sit with images. I get to self-reflect. And I feel photography is also good for like healing, like depression, anxiety, a lot of things, PTSD, things that a lot of us deal with a community I come from. But it brings forth a sense of community and camaraderie amongst my peers. And it's sad, a lot of the imageries that's in that book and in my first book, a lot of the people that I photograph are no longer here. And I start really understanding the impact of the imagery when families will reach out to me and asking for images of their loved ones for obituaries and things like that. But, the imagery I'm able to capture shows a different side. Like my friend was killed coming from a restaurant a couple months ago, and his family reached out to me for imagery. But like, they try to, he has this long extensive record, and they show like these hard-hitting images. But I had images of like him shaving my friend's head in his mother's kitchen, those more intimate moments, with his kids that a lot of people don't get to see, and in turns it gives people a chance to reflect on themselves, so a lot of times, we lose people so often, you forget them because it's like a part of life. But with the imagery, it gets them time to sit with that and miss that person, to grieve that person, But even on a positive side, just working with the youth, because I start teaching inner city kids photography. They are learning to love each other. They don't really see a lot of positive imagery of themselves. A lot of the images, like I see it from photographers not from my community, where they're going to communities similar to Baltimore. You'll see images of kids with their middle fingers up and all these images. Is like, like you're a kid, like, so let's bring that youthfulness and that joy out of you. So I'm all about telling the truth, of course, but I love to look at myself as kind of like a light bringer. Like I like to bring light through the camera, and really let people connect, and really show the authenticity of my community. A lot of times we want to sum up my community under one image when that person has multiple layers to them. They're a human being. And you brought up the Lawrence Bernie, his essay is called Big Floyd, because George Floyd was an artist. He was a rapper in Houston. He was a part of like that chopped and screwed thing. And these are the things that, that we don't talk about when we lose these people, how the human side, they just become a name on a shirt or a flyer or a poster board. But when they, and I found that out with Freddie Gray, anywhere I would go to talk about Freddie Gray, to talk about, well, he had a knife on him. He had a drug record, but his community loves him. And that's why they wrapped their arms around his family. And that's why people reacted that way.
And I think you just hit on something really important, which is this idea of like, who are the images for and then how do they circulate? And Jamal Shabazz, who you've mentioned several times, who wrote the foreword to your book, is an incredible photographer who not a lot of people know, and his images are right up on the screen. He photographed various New York City communities, still to this day, but he started doing it in the late 70s, early 1980s. And what was incredible about his work is that it wasn't shown anywhere outside of his community. So what he would do is he actually walked around with traditional family photo albums of his work, little 4x6 drugstore prints. And he would find people that he felt represented cool or kind of confidence that he wanted to capture. And he would convince them to have their photograph taken by showing them these albums of images that he took right there. And it was the first time for many of these individuals that he photographed that they saw themselves being represented. And it was about the system of exchange. At the time, he was also working as an officer in Rikers Island, and so he would bring photographs in and out of the jail, and bring photographs in of family and friends, bring photographs back out to the family and friends, and it was about the system of exchange. And you've done that as well. Your photographs have circulated in the press, but you've also then have given those photographs back, and you touched on kind of what that meant. So is that how you sort of first thought about your photographs circulating? How do you think about the photographs that make it out in the world and are seen on the pages of a magazine with a caption that a journalist writes to describe it versus the images that you take and then you gift back to the individuals you photographed?
Yeah, definitely. It's a big difference, because I'm not creating, like a lot of the work that I create, I'm doing it because I love my community. I'm shooting directly from my heart, similar to going combating with the things that I love, but also things that I hate. So a lot of times I'm not there to just document the moment. It's like, this picture was taken on this day, and this person is yelling at this person, and this is what you're looking at. That's not, my goal. My goal is to create narratives. I want to create a conversation. So I look to create imagery to make people want to talk about these serious issues. If it's gentrification, if it's police brutality, anything, I just want to invoke an emotion, like a call to action. So it's not so much about, telling people what they see. I love just capturing images and you tell me what you see, because everybody sees something different. And sometimes I think captions, that's why there's no captions in the book, because I feel like that takes away from what I want you to digest. Sometimes I don't want to lead you to no conclusion. I want you to come to your own from what you see from what I created. And what really inspired that was my very first show, which was at the Reginald Ralph Lewis Museum. I donated a lot of all the time proofs there, and he was like, "You should do a show." And I was like, "I don't even know what I'm doing right now. Like, I just got the time cover. I don't know what I'm doing." They was like, "Well, we're gonna help you." And I did this show, and it was an image. I remember it was a police officer strapping on his helmet right before everything happened. It was a black police officer, and you could just see the tears welting in his eyes. And I remember posting it. And everybody was like, he probably has allergies. He's not really crying. He doesn't, and it was like, I was there. I know he's really crying. I couldn't get the shot that I wanted. And I hate that. Like, it was like 1 second after. But, you can see the tears welting. And I remember sitting in my show. My cousin just came home from 11 years in jail. And he was talking to a guy that I knew who was a police officer, too. And they were just hitting on all these things and agreeing while they were looking at this image. And, like, my cousin hates police. And it's like, and I was like, oh, that's a police officer. Y'all got a lot in common, though, don't you? And it was just like, that's the conversation I want to start, because they wouldn't even cross paths or even interact with each other. But the image it was something about it that drew them to that, to have a conversation, a hard conversation. But it turns out, even though they're on different sides of the fence, they actually agreed on a lot of the same points. And that's when I was like, that's my work. That's the goal. Is to create something, to invoke something, to create a conversation, to make people talk. And that's why I try to create stalking imagery, to kind of drill it forward to the finish line. I feel like photography is one of the best collaborative, mediums, with photography. I love pairing it with words and working with writers. And, sometimes a photograph is not strong enough, and that's when you can bring in other mediums to mix with it. But the goal is always to create a conversation with anything that I do.
And it's, what it speaks to is this idea of portraits as a way of understanding place, and to really focus on the humanity of the subjects, which is, of course, what Gordon Parks was so known for. This idea that even if you're sent on assignment, you don't just go in, document, and come out. You really take the time to get to know your subjects, to understand their point of view, so that it does become a collaboration between the subject and the photographer and eventually the viewer. And what's extraordinary is the way in which your images swing from these, sweeping views of protest and events that act as kind of bearing witness and documentation, but then you also have these extended studies of individuals and places that are, that take time and are really about your relationship. But again, the humanity of everybody comes through regardless of type of images. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the extended projects that you've done, these studies that you've done, and maybe how that was slightly different than the protest images that are in the book?
Yeah, I'm a storyteller, and a good storyteller understands that I'm not meant to tell every story. I'm not meant to, I always bring this up where I was asked to, document stuff around the Women's March, and I was like, well, why are you sending me? And they was like, well, we love you, what you did in Baltimore. And I was like, yeah, a black man died, and I'm a black man, so, very attached to that work, how about I send you some, black and brown women photographers that I know, and let them shoot it. And that's the interesting thing with the way of the world now. People just going and documenting without even having an understanding. That's why a lot of my work has always been rooted in Baltimore. And then people like, something might happen and here, say something happened here in Chicago, instead of me just, plopping in just because even, I might have some similarities growing up in the hood, I would rather, have a conduit linked with it. How can I elevate another photographer that's already on the ground? Because I know how it feels when an external voice is louder than the internal voice, where I can tell this story, but you're telling my story for me, and I can find that sometimes disheartening, definitely when you don't have the time to fully understand that, and so when I decide I want to do a project, like my protest work, it's hard to describe it because it's like you can't deny what is, what God or whatever you believe in is like, that's your thing. Like you were there for a reason. You have to follow it through. It's like destiny. But in between that, documenting Baltimore, I spend a lot of time trying to understand my own life and understanding how we end up in the circumstances that we are in. And my first book, A Beautiful Ghetto, is I wanted to document and show what Freddie Gray would have looked like every single day. So it's more so moving away from protest, but what does everyday life look like in Baltimore? Those small moments, eating crab on a stoop, or riding dirt bikes through the block. What would Freddie Gray have seen? And that was something that work is still being continued. And that series is called A Beautiful Ghetto, or just looking at the ever-changing landscape of Baltimore, where communities are disappearing. We have Johns Hopkins and a lot of other big institutions that, that are changing the landscape and displacing people inside of my community. What does that look like? So it's like, photographing these places, but taking it a step farther and going inside of these houses and pulling out what I call relics. Like I found old report cards, and I'll find like family albums of things like just people that have been displaced, and that's one of the moments where photography is just not enough. So I have to, take it a step further and start building installation. And that series was called Spaces of the Unentitled, because it's a word I made up because everybody was using the word entitlement. I'm entitled. You're entitled. That was like the whole Trump saga. Everyone's you're entitled. But I'm like, what about the people that's like unentitled, like from where I'm from, and it's like these spaces that we dwell in, and just looking at that ecosystem, And right now, I'm working on a series where I realized, looking at while working on this book, and I realized just like the impact that the church had, during the civil rights and everything. But for my generation, it's the absence of it, and the fact that like when I walk in my neighborhood, everywhere I see a abandoned church, I see a liquor store, then I see a corner store. But then we have food deserts, we have bad homelessness problem, youth problems, and then we have a murder rate that's sky high. We averaging 300 plus murders a year, and we're the size of Brooklyn. But it's all these abandoned churches, and this is so interesting to me. So I've been documenting these churches and everything. So a lot of times when I find a project, a lot of times I will be photographing things. I literally walk around with a camera all day, and it's like, I will find things, and then it's like, and I would just latch onto it and then build around it.
I think what you just described is the definition of what it means to create art as a form of activism, and art as and photography as an act of care, of ethics. And so just before we have to turn it over to our audience for question, I want to finish with your book, which is wonderful. And you see here on the back of the book, these are the list of all the contributing authors that have text in this book. And you mentioned that it's all photographs of protests, and you've chosen not to include the date or the location of the photos. And so the texts, which written by a variety of individuals, kind of act as captions to the photographs. They activate the photographs. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of putting this book together, how you chose the contributors, how it all came together as a collaborative project?
Yeah, the crazy part, I didn't even want to do no book. I wasn't even ready. It's like one of those things. It's like Baltimore, I'm one of the ones that made it out, and I got a small crew that I run with. D. Watkins, who's in the book, Kondwani Fidel, they're from East Baltimore. But we're like Kobe, Shaq, and Dirk Fisher. But, we're the ones that made it out. Like one of my friends walks with a limp. He had a bullet removed from his leg. My other friend, he writes about it a lot, growing up with his dad being incarcerated half his life, and mom, and on and off drugs, me, I was in the streets, I buried both my best friends when I first got my camera. They got murdered right after that. So we have all these things in common, but we're the ones that made it out. And we work together, and we try to uplift each other as lift and climb. And I just remember my friend, he was working on a book, and he was like, I want you to be my publisher. You should do a book. And this one I reached out to Peter, and they was like, yeah, they might want to do something with some writings of Martin Luther King. And then I was like, Peter was like, well, you might not get those writings. And I was like, all right, cool. And then I ended up like, so what am I going to do? And they really wanted to do something around, the past, the present, and everything. And I was like, I'm calling the Gordon Parks Foundation. Hey guys, can I go through Gordon's work and pull images, and like the whole Justin, it just started coming together so beautifully. And the way that I did it was, from just taking the page out of, I love how Gordon, could collaborate with other authors and writers, and that was like the really big inspiration. But the biggest thing that I've learned as a photographer, sometimes I get to be a bystander in the moment, and I'm lucky enough where like I'm able to interact with people with all different walks of life, and that's what I love about art in general. It brings people from all different walks of life together, so I'm able to hang with different types of activist groups and organizers and all these different things. And even though they all have this one goal, they all have different views. Like you might have some people that are more militant. You have some people that are more peaceful. There's some people who are all about politics. And some people was like, no, politics is a pile of shit. We're focusing on this. Or, some people, we got to infiltrate the system. It was like, no, we need to dismantle the system. It's like all these different ideas, but as a photographer, I'm welcoming all these different spaces, because I'm kind of like the art glue between everybody. I'm always like the one that stops the arguments. But I wanted to create a book, that people can understand how complex, everything is. It's a simple act to be free and to be treated as a human being, but it's a very complex situation, and I wanted to pull writers that it has something for everybody, so you have people like Kianga Hamada from Princeton, that writes about the emancipation, But then you can turn around and read something from D. Watkins, who wrote an amazing piece talking about what happens the day after the protest. Then you have Moon Wobbling by Jacqueline Woodson, and these amazing poetry from Leslie Honore. We talked about Lois Burney, but then at the end of the book, you read something from Tiffany Lofton, talk about the importance of taking a vacation and resting after you do all the hard work and regenerating and, taking that time to rest. So I wanted to make a book that had enough something for everybody, but I really wanted to put people on an emotional roller coaster because that's what it was for me. I want to make you happy. I want to make you sad. I want to make you angry, but when it's all said and done, I wanted to make you understand that every little thing that you do is important. You're never too small. You're never too big. Anything small, I take pictures. That is my God-given talent, and I did that, and I put that towards the movement and then trying to make change in my small way. And I want to encourage everybody to understand that if the pen is your tool or is your voice, some people it might be your pockets. You got cash. Lend it to the movement. It's nothing that's too small to make change, and that's what I really wanted to show with this book by reaching for people that might seem scholarly, but then picking people like my mom, who just talks about being a black mom.
No, and the book really functions as a kind of handbook for what it means to make, again, art as activism. So we have so much more to talk about, but I want to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to turn it over to our Q&A leader.
Hello, everyone. So for the Q&A, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will come bring the mic to you. When you get the mic, please state your name and ask your question. Please keep your questions brief and to questions only, please. Who wants to go first? Oh. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Do I have to stand? Okay. Hi, my name's Corbin. My question is, I think one of the struggles that I see with art is how do you sort of evolve and grow? So my question is, how do you experiment? What does experimentation sort of look like for you? And then how do you incorporate that into some of your more, I guess if you want to say commercial or just bringing that out into the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's when I started this work, sometimes as artists they can get forced into a box, and that's a lot of the industry stuff that I had to deal with. Where, black people die, I'm one of the first people they want to call, and I kind of got forced into that corner. But what I started to do was, I create out of emotion, and a lot. Sadly enough, some of that stuff is trauma, and during COVID, I had a time to really experiment with emotions. Understanding that photography does have its limitations. I get to document what's going on around me, but what about all those other emotions that I can bring forward? So I started writing again. I started playing with scans and painting. I've gone as far as done performance art. Just to get the point across. Anytime I find limitations with photography. Like I said, it's one of my favorite things to collaborate. How can I, take it a step forward to bring it into the real world? I always encourage, a lot of artists, a lot of times we can tend to become comfortable, definitely in this social media age where once something works for us and we're known for it, we will tend not to push barriers anymore out of fear that it won't be received as well or we haven't perfected it. I think that's the best part of the process. I hate when if something seems too perfect for me, it's not perfect at all, so I always try to push myself to, dig deep and then pull out anything that I can do just to get the story across. So if it's something that photography can't do, I will turn to the pen. I've been writing a lot more often. I hang with a bunch of writers, so I've been learning and understanding. Sometimes, I will have to experiment with video just to get that point across. So as an artist, I always say the moment, my mom always say the moment you stop learning, that's when you're an idiot. So I'm always trying to keep learning and keep pushing no matter what. Photography will always be my foundation and my first true love. But whatever it takes to get the point across, I will play with any medium that I have to.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, you obviously are a very talented photographer. Not everybody who wants to play music or write or do photography gets to go to, a nice school that teaches you all the techniques and the lineage and all that kind of stuff. Still, you can learn those things. You obviously have done that. There's a lot to what you're doing in terms of the techniques and the skills and the knowledge that's brought out in here that you haven't talked about. If you want to do things like that, be a photographer or be a musician, and you don't have access to the formal, the academy, which is going to give you the stated knowledge and give you that credibility, how do you develop those skills? How did you develop those skills in yourself so that you could manifest it?
Yeah, when I first started, it's funny because I do the same thing to the kids that I teach. And I would try to emulate, work that Gordon was doing and shoot like him and everything. But what I found was I couldn't do it because I didn't actually know what I was doing. So you know what I did? I went to YouTube University and I started, why is this picture dark? Why is this picture overexposed? Why is it this? And as I started learning the basic techniques, I learned those rules so I can break those rules, because even now, where, I go do talks, I've had a lot of criticism about my work. Oh, you overexposed, or you're blowing out your whites, or you're underexposed. It's too dark, and it was like you're crushing your blacks, and it was like it's never enough black. It's always more black. That's my style. So once I learned, I studied, Gordon, Anthony Barboza, Jamal Shabazz, Carrie May, looking at, just photographs after photograph after photographs and finding attributes and things that I like and how to emulate those things and also make it my own. And I tell my kids all the time, it's like you can recreate something. It's not hard to recreate anything. What is hard is finding yourself in your own work and staying true to oneself. So what I encourage all artists to do is, study everything, get everything right, learn those techniques, but break those rules. Find a way to make your viewer connect to your work. I find that my favorite photographers, I feel like I know them through the work. I feel connected to them. When I look at Gordon shooting Muhammad Ali, you can see the connection in the love there, similar to him documenting Malcolm X and all these other people. So it's like sometimes the camera is not even the weapon, is just the person and the humility inside of you to make people feel vulnerable and comfortable around you, and that's a technique that a lot of people don't have. So I always tell people it's not even about the tools, it's you can make crap art, but can you explain why is it crap? And I find that sometimes that's the essence of the art. It's not so much about the actual product. It's that sometimes it's actually about the person that is the art in itself.
And I think it's important to add that all of those mentors and inspirations that you just named, they're all self-taught too. So that's really interesting. It's learning by looking and learning by breaking the rules. Gordon Parks looked at the work of the Farm Security Administration photographers who were tasked with documenting the effects of the Great Depression on Americans. And he looked at them and he saw in that what he wanted to change and what he wanted to undo. And so it is about looking, and then figuring out, what the next step is beyond that.
Hello, my name is Austin over here. You mentioned the importance of storytelling and bringing forth your own narratives. And I know that there's so many artists here in Chicago, specifically artists of color, living on the South and West Side that are trying to bring forth our narratives, especially once there's a negative connotation associated with the violence in Chicago. So my question to you is what advice would you give to those artists that, kind of like what we were saying earlier, folks that might not have formal training or don't have those avenues, about bringing their narratives forward and, when they become discouraged to kind of keep going, what advice would you give to them?
I'm one of them artists, and the biggest thing is you will get discouraged doing the work, definitely when you're so close to it. And I think that's what brings the most impactful artwork, when you're tied to it and close to it. But, also the work when you're trying to change narratives and change, the energy that's being deposited in that space. It's difficult work. It's taxing work. You're gonna want to quit. You're gonna want to stop. You're gonna be depressed. You're gonna feel those things. It comes with the work. And I've seen artists that have started, in Baltimore, that started with me, and they have given up, because the work was never received. It's just like, remember why you started the work from the beginning. Why did I start documenting Baltimore? It's because I got tired of people controlling the narrative for me. And I always go back to that. So when I want to quit, like, trust me, it's some days that I don't want to. I haven't touched my camera in like a month. But that's okay too. It's a part of the process. Sometimes you have to step away from the camera and step away from your medium. We're human beings. I think a lot of times, definitely, in the social media age where we feel like we see other people working so much and gaining success and doing so many things, is like make us feel like we're not moving fast enough. And then understanding that art is, you're going to have those moments of instant gratification, but also this is a slow grind. We're trying, similar to Chicago to Baltimore to Detroit, DC, Philly. These narratives have been going on for a long time, so just dismantling them and changing them is going to take even longer. I don't. People still look at Baltimore the same. I can just do my little part to change it. The biggest thing is sometimes to create the work, take a step back, and then recalibrate, find other ways. Like I said, experimenting with other things sometimes, helps me a lot to get over those humps when I don't want to feel like creating. My friend got kidnapped and murdered, like a month ago, and it was heartbreaking because I just was with him and everything, and I didn't, I was like, why am I even doing this work? Why am I continually to taking these pictures and my friends are dying? But then I remember I see the change in the youth though. When I'm seeing kids walking around with cameras and kids do projects about me in school and teachers ask me to come visit, that's the win. I might not see the change in my generation, but the next generation is being influenced to take a different route, to take the art route, understanding that, and that's one of the reasons why I make myself so accessible in Baltimore. People are like, you're not scared? Walk around with all that special camera equipment? Like, first of all, no one knows what I'm carrying around in the community, first of all. And, they want pictures taken, but I'm seeing the change in the youth where they're starting to, come out of their shells. And, I've given out over 600 plus cameras. I'm like probably close to 1,000 now. I got kids going. One of my kids got a 4 ride to NYU. One of my other kids go to Baltimore School of the Arts right now, same place Tupac and Jada Pinkett with. I'm seeing the change. So sometimes continue to work, take a step from the work, and sometimes it's always good to, just self-reflect sometimes. So I encourage every artist, those moments when you want to quit, don't quit, just take a step back and, and recalibrate. And then go back to the drawing board. But this work is going to be long, it's taxing, it's hard. And also just build a community around you of people of like minds that can lift you up when you're down. I have brothers and sisters that's doing the same work that I do. So when I'm feeling low, when I'm feeling drained, they're there for me. This work is not, you can't do this work as just one artist. If you look at how many people Gordon was able to help, Gordon helped one of my mentors, rest in peace, Robert Houston. He got his first job from Gordon. He snuck into Gordon's office. And Gordon ripped him to shreds. He said, you don't have a lot of pictures of people. He was like, what, you don't like people? And Robert Houston said, well, I can take them and leave them. And Gordon said, well, if you want to be in this business, you better take them. And now you can go down to the Poor People Campaign and shoot your project. And it's like, it takes community and artists. And sometimes the best artists, it's not even about the art that you create, but the other artists you're able to, push and activate. It's people that I was talking backstage about one of my young artists. I gave him a camera, and now he's shooting up a storm. I'm jealous. I'm too busy. I can't shoot like you, but I'm pushing him. So sometimes the art might not be you to be the one that breaks that mold and change that narrative. It might be someone that you touch, someone that you put those spiritual deposits in and that time in. So I always encourage artists to be mentors to the next generation and seek out mentors also.
Hi there. Your protest images have to be part of the canon right now, and I know photographers think differently about signage, about whether viewers want to read the words on the signs, or whether they're just backdrop. What's your thought process when you're at a protest and you see signs?
Yeah, signs are interesting because I've watched, and this is something that going through Gordon's work, the evolution of signage. Where signage was like, if you look at the civil rights movement, you look at the "I am a man." It was all one linear message. It was one goal. Everybody was in line. It was very well organized. And I felt, and you have every city has different chants. I picked "No Justice, No Peace" simply because it was the first chant that I heard when I shot my first protest and the first signage. If you just look at how many campaigns and how many people, if you think about Sandra Bland, say her name. If you think about, in Baltimore, we had all night, all day, we will fight for Freddie Gray. And the sad part is I've watched, from 2014, from my first protest till last year, I've watched signage become, it's an important tactic, but it also sometimes bothers me how it is used. Sometimes I feel like some people show up and say, I want to have the best and cleverest sign ever. Get my picture, and it's like, I understand that, but I do understand signage can also get in the way of things. Sometimes signage can overshadow what we are actually here for, and looking at just the from the civil rights movement, you look at the signage of the Black Panther was one linear message at one point. Black Lives Matter, it started off as one, viewpoint, but then there's all these different views. But also it's important to understand that there's so many different subsections inside of Black Lives Matter, and I found this out, once again, like I said earlier, like it's okay to be ignorant, and I was ignorant to a lot of things, and I found this out going to a Black Trans Lives Matter march that I went to in Baltimore, and and I just went thinking it was a regular protest. It was for Tony McDade and Breonna Taylor, and what I realized is that they created their own signs, their own hashtag, their own everything because the lack of support that they were getting when their bodies are also on the line, and they felt ignored when they show up for every other subsection in every part of the community, but Black trans lives were not part of the conversation. And that's when signage is important to understand that. And similar to, you might see a lot of signage around Black women because, the Black community sometimes doesn't show up in its entirety and certain people don't. So signage is very, very important. It can be, allowing people to be seen when they're not heard. But at the same time, I do feel like sometimes signage does get in the way into the overarching point of why we have gathered that day and what we're fighting for.
And I also want to chime in that it's really interesting to see how signage plays a role in these historic images that we saw from Gordon Parks from 63 and 67. The signage is part of what resonates today, right? If those images didn't have that text on them, they wouldn't resonate in the same way. They wouldn't feel as of the moment. So it's also interesting to think about how we see that text later down the road after the fact. How does it translate and how does it transform?
Alrighty, folks, this will be our final question. As a reminder, there's a book signing following this program in the lounge. If you have not purchased your book yet or picked it up, you can do so at the Seminary Co-op in the lobby. Now here's our final question.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Kenneth. So I love your work, by the way, and thanks for coming. So my question is, you talked a lot about the inner city and the kids in the inner city. And I'm from the inner city of Chicago, and I know like the viewpoint there is the outlets can be so narrow to where you can go, especially even with photography. There's not a lot of kids walking around with cameras on the west side of Chicago. My question is, what's your strategy just to get the youth engaged and to keep them engaged with photography? Because, I just picked up a camera and it's new to me, but I feel like it's such an outlet for the youth and it can really change the world.
Man, that's when I mean tough. Kids are tough. Shout out if you're a teacher just in general, the patience that you have to have. So shout out to all my teachers. I remember Russell Simmons gave me a $20,000 grant when he saw my GoFundMe, because right after the Time cover, I was like, all right, I got all this media attention. It can't stop here. So I started a GoFundMe to buy cameras. And I got the cameras. And it was so funny because when I got the check, I thought I was going to just like get a check or deposit it. They really gave me like a huge lottery check. And I got like this little hatchback car. So imagine driving through the projects and through a hood with a $25,000 check hanging out the back of my little Scion hatchback. I just hear people yelling at me, Devin, let me hold $1. Let me hold something. Let me cut me. Yo. We in the club tonight, we popping bottles. Like, no, we're not. This is for the kids. And I remember going to, we had one, store, Service Photo in Baltimore, and they used to hate my guts because I would come in there and say test all the equipment out, and I'd be like, oh, let me get that filter going on top of my camera. I have $1,000 of equipment, and they just leave, But I went there, they were super helpful. Got camera bags, extra lens, clean. I was just so pumped. I bought brand new T5Is, Canon T5Is, and some Nikon D3200s. So I'm like, I want them to have like good cameras and really experience these things. So they took an old laundromat and turned it to a safe space to get kids off the street. Because a lot of people forget that Freddie Gray, when the uprising happened, it was high school kids that started it, that started everything. They were the ones clashing with police, and then the community got pulled in. But it was like 15-year-old kids. So to get kids off the street, people started delivering Xboxes and food and GameCubes and PlayStation, so kids could get off the street because school was closed, public transportation was closed. We had police officers from New Jersey, Philadelphia, D.C., and Baltimore, National Guard. And you got kids weaving their bikes through up and down, clashing with police officers. And I remember like, I'm gonna go there and teach. And I pulled up. I knew the lady that started the center, got the cameras, and I hopped out who wants to learn photography? And I just remember this kid like flipping me the bird, like, I don't want to learn that shit. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to Asia with Steph Curry. And they said, you going where? I said, I'm going to shoot Steph Curry in Asia. They was like, give me the camera. Come on. You give me the camera. And what I found was the camera, what happened was, and it was so fun teaching them, and I started off like 30 kids, and then eventually it dropped down to like 5. Kids, because they wanted to be outside, play basketball. But I had 5 solid kids that showed up every day that were just adamant about it. So we would just walk around their neighborhood. I'm from a different side I'm from Northwest, they were from Southwest. Some of them knew Freddie Gray, their brothers hung with them, so we would just walk around, document whatever they wanted to do. One of my kids started gravitating took pictures of locks every day. I'm like, I don't understand it, but that's your thing. I'm gonna help you find locks, all the locks. And, one of my friends just like shooting basketball. But what started out is just me wanting to teach photography. It turned into a little family. They turned into like my little brothers, my little sisters. They're all, when I met them, they were in the 7th grade. They're like 20 now, and I still talk to them. And, that's one way, which is more so I let them experiment and have fun. And they would get frustrated like I would. Why my picture this is all white? Why? I'm like, this is what you do. This is aperture. This is ISO. This is this. And it was like, oh, I love it, and then it was like, y'all ready to do an art show? Yeah, we ready, we did an art show. It was amazing. I went back to my neighborhood, what I did, I try to do it different ways. You have to engage. Every kid is a little different. Communities are different. I'm not familiar with Chicago, but I know Northwest Baltimore, we grew up in, so we got Victorian houses in our neighborhood. It's still the hood, but we got row houses, Victorian houses. It's different from growing up in the projects. It's a different mentality. And I understood that. So then when I went to Northwest Baltimore in my neighborhood, I collaborated with the librarian. So kids had to write me essays about why you want to learn photography, and if you had a camera, what would you do? And they wrote these beautiful essays, and then the kids, I selected 10, and those kids could actually go and rent out cameras. So you not only just rent out a book from the library, you can rent out a camera now, and then all I ask is after school, give me one day a week, and we would watch, we watched Through a Lens Darkly. We watched all these, documentary, around photography, and these kids learn one kid taught themselves how to light paint. So she started writing stuff with long shutters. One of our other kids is a basketball player. He started documenting basketball and engaging them. So what I would do is just find something they were interested in and just help them elevate that through the medium, and they fell in love with it. One of my kids, they did an art show. They even had the president of MICA came to their show, and I had to teach them how to sell the artwork, because like, this is how y'all gonna make some money. Oh, go up there and explain your work. And they went out there, talking their stuff. Yeah, I took this picture because, and just the joy and they got interviewed. It was like bringing all those different elements, not just the photography, but allowing them to do shows, explain their work, showing them how to sit on a panel, how to articulate their work. And what I found was photography allows them to communicate. Thanks to the Gordon Parks Foundation, I went further from the grant that I got from the Gordon Parks Foundation. I told kids with autism and intellectual disabilities, which blew my mind. One of my kids was nonverbal, but he was a food photographer. He liked food, so he wouldn't communicate, but he learned how to communicate through the photograph. One of my kids that was more, high on the spectrum, he was in Boy Scouts, and he started getting paid to document people getting their badges. And it's like photography. It's like I would suggest, finding kids, start big and then let the kids select you. My kids selected me. I didn't force myself on them or anything. I showed up. I showed I cared, and they selected me to be in their life. And now, my kids, they get on my nerves, but they think they will FaceTime me like 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, I know it's summertime. You don't have school, but I work. Stop calling me. You build that camaraderie, and sometimes the kids definitely coming from places like that, showing them that you care. Like, it got to the point where kids wouldn't even just be into the photography. They just want to hang out with us. We'll be out taking pictures. We're like, oh, can I model for y'all today? Y'all gonna get Burger King afterwards? All right, come on, we gonna get, it's building that community and that friendship and that, and they're fine. And so I would suggest, find kids collaboration. I collaborated with a lot of teachers and schools and basketball coaches and things like that, finding kids that might already be interested into it, let them select you, and then just build. And, being as though that you just got into it, that's the perfect time to do it because you can learn together. Sometimes kids will be intimidated by me because they've seen all the stuff that I've been able to do, and they'll be kind of hesitant to ask questions or just feel overwhelmed. But since you're starting too, that's a good segue to, and we can learn this thing together. That's a good way to start too.
Well, thank you, Devin, for that, for being here, for all that you do. I feel like we could talk for hours more, but and thank you all for being here today, and to be continued, right?